I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to elders past and present. Also extending that respect to all traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. And I would love to invite Gillian to give us an Aotearoa New Zealand greeting as well.
Thank you. Kia koutou ngā maunga, ngā awa, ngā waka, ngā tupuna o Aotearoa, me te whenua moe e hui hui mai nei, tēnā koutou katoa. To you the mountains, river, waka, ancestors of Aotearoa, and the land of the dreaming that are gathered here, greetings to you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. We're going to hear from Gillian really soon. She's one of our first speakers. But firstly, everybody, for those I haven't met yet, I'm Jay Weatherburn. I work currently at the University of Melbourne. I manage a program of work focused on implementing long-term digital preservation across the organisation. And I also work for the International Digital Preservation Coalition, working to really share a lot of the openly available resources of the DPC, as well as the membership benefits of the DPC in the Australasian region. I am your host today in my capacity as one of the amazing co-organisers of this Australasia Preserves digital preservation community of practice. And I'm joined in this endeavour by my other volunteer co-organisers. I'm going to get them to wave and call out in the chat box. So we've got Rachel Trappier, Matthew Burgess, Andrea Guthels, Leanne Raymond, and Dave Allen. So say hello, folks. These folks are responsible for helping to keep this community really ticking along, helping organise these meetups, doing blog posts, social media, managing the AusPreserves forum and the website. And this is really a call out. We're always welcoming new people. If you're interested in taking a more active role in this community, please do get in touch with us. You can see a contact list on the slide here. Give us a yell. On that note, I'm going to give Rachel the floor for a minute because we have a pretty special little milestone membership announcement. Rachel's been managing our membership for the month's path.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing okay. Yes, so we've hit a milestone this month. We've just hit 411 members, so we cracked the 400 mark, which is fantastic. Membership has really been going strong. It's never really stopped, and we'd really love to hear from you in our forum a bit more. So anyone who has never introduced yourself, please just give us, a little quick hello and tell us who you are and what you do, or if you've got anything, that's happened in your work recently, or, we've used the forum for a number of things. Like recently I just asked it, I asked a general question just about PDs and I got great responses, or you might have a very particular, technical issue to do with digital archiving, and there's been some really great discussions in the past on that as well. So yeah, please do join in. We really would love to hear from you, and it doesn't matter who you are, what your expertise is. This is we try to make this a safe, happy space for everyone to come in and say what they need to say, be who they are. So welcome to our new members, and hello to everyone else, and hope to hear from you on our forum. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Rachel. Perfect warm welcome. And that's a good segue for me to say we do have a code of conduct for the community. Preserving digital stuff is not just a problem for traditional memory institutions anymore. It's a problem for a whole wide range of professional people as well as citizens. So this community is made up of a very wide range of social and cultural and professional backgrounds. In short, we ask that everyone brings a spirit of respect and friendly inquiry to all of our interactions. There's a link to the full code of conduct on this slide. And if you have any issues at all, anytime, get in touch with me or one of the co-organisers of the community. Please, if you can, give yourself an identifiable name on Zoom. If you don't know, if you're not very familiar with this platform, have no idea how to do that, just sing out in the chat. There's a whole bunch of people who can help talk you through how to do that, to give yourself an identifiable name. And please use the chat function. Introduce yourself, say hi, let us know if there's any issues as we go. Feel free to use it as a back channel if you want to really take advantage of this community meetup and this platform, this virtual platform we have for connecting with each other. Alrighty, our agenda. We have 3 fantastic speakers today. This is a social media preservation focused meetup. We have Gillian Lee from the National Library of New Zealand, telling us all about ingesting a first Twitter collection into the National Digital Heritage Archive. We have Sean Volk from State Library of New South Wales, talking about the Vizie platform, and we'll be joined by Jean Melzak from the University of Melbourne, talking to us about the use of social media archives and their APIs for research. We will have a bit of time for questions, discussion. As we go through the speakers, we'll go straight through them. So if you have questions as we go, pop them into the chat and we'll go straight through. Discussion and question time at the end. And at the very end, we're going to stick around for a bit and have some informal chat. So if you're thinking about being more active in the community and you want to meet the co-organizers, get a sense of our vibe, come along at the end, have a chat with us. It's really just an informal chance to chat to others working digital preservation around the region. So that's it. Without further ado, let's get to the good stuff. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to invite Gillian to the stage to go ahead and share your slides and get us going.
Okay, thank you. You can see that all right, Jay, the screen?
Got it. Nice work.
Great. Brilliant. Okay. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody today. It's really good to be talking about social media, and there's so much happening in that space at the moment. And so thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about the first Twitter data set that we collected at the National Library several years ago and which we archived this year. I just want to acknowledge the staff involved in this project, and it's been definitely a cross-team collaborative approach. I just realized my video's gone off again. I'll just switch that back on again, see if that works. Otherwise, you're just seeing a squirrel. Yeah, so it's been a cross-team collaborative approach. It's involved web archivists, digital archivists, digital preservation experts, the content services team, and arrangement and description colleagues. I'm the coordinator web archives for the Alexander Turnbull Library, and our team of web archivists primarily harvest New Zealand websites from the internet for the library's collections. And social media obviously is a large part of the web, and we've been very keen to see the library collect social media as well. So what I'm going to do is give you a bit of a background to how this data set came about, and then the approach that we took, and then how we went about describing and packaging the content for ingest into our digital archive. And then finally, I'll talk about the steps moving forward. And then when I finish my talk, I'll paste any references that I've referred to in the chat box afterwards. Okay, let's see if this is going to work. That's not going to work. Let's have a look here. Just try again. There we are. That's changed. Good. So back in 2015, when our team first started looking at collecting social media, it was because we were concerned that this was a major gap in our collections. We could see in our thematic and event web harvesting that many web owners were switching to using social media platforms, and we had limited success capturing individual social media accounts with the web harvesting tools that we were using at the time, or getting downloaded social media archives from donors. It was also very time consuming, so we needed a rethink. The 3 main social media platforms that were high on our list to collect were from Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We started with Twitter because its terms and conditions were the least restrictive of the social media platforms. Other institutions like the UK National Archives were collecting government social media, and some universities overseas were collecting Twitter data sets for research purposes. We were also reading about the development of the social feed manager tool, but we didn't know too much about APIs and whether that would be an option for us. In late 2016, Ben O'Brien was appointed to the role of Digital Preservation Web Engineer in the PRC team, that's our preservation team. And he got us thinking about using the Twitter API to run a Twitter harvest during significant New Zealand events. The idea was to pick up tweets using hashtags and search terms. So it was a shift in our thinking for the web archiving team to move to collecting individual tweets on a particular topic rather than collecting someone's individual Twitter account. But we could see the benefit of collecting tweets from a much wider audience and providing a data set that could be used by researchers. So we thought about running a pilot project. Then in November 2016, the 7.8 Kaikoura earthquake occurred, and there was a flurry of activity on Twitter about this. So we decided to capture tweets about the earthquake over a 2-week period. And you can read more about this in our blog post, which I think I've got linked there. Yes, I have. And then Ben ran the harvest using Twark, which is a tool developed by Documenting the Now. And they're a community in the States that support the ethical collection, use, and preservation of social media content. Jay Catuzzo, our digital preservation analyst, did some analysis on the dataset for us so that we could get an idea of what was in the dataset. Jay created a CSV file of the tweets and some screen grabs that really helped us see what was there and what wasn't. It's kind of difficult to know what to archive if you haven't got that window into the data. So next we had discussions about what content was important to preserve. We'd collected the tweets in JSON format, but tweets are more than just text. They also include images and media files and links to web pages. So we had a bit of a discussion. We decided that we needed to collect the images as well. So the PRC team developed a script to pick up the images that were referenced in the tweets. And then we needed to decide what kind of access we could provide to the various files. Ben thought that creating hashed and unhashed CSV files could be useful as another window into the dataset. Ben got this idea from Twitter. In 2018, Twitter released a series of election integrity datasets, which contained access copies of tweets. We used their structure and format as a precedent for our own reading room copies. These provide access to all the tweets and the majority of their metadata, but with all identifying user details obfuscated by hashed values. We also thought it would be helpful to create a README file that shows some of the provenance and technical details of the dataset. Some of this information was added to the descriptive record, but we felt that a README file might include more information and it will remain with the dataset. So researcher access to the dataset is primarily via the tweet ID text file. These are system numbers used by Twitter's API to rehydrate the tweets, and it will only hydrate tweets that haven't been deleted. So Ben and I sorted the files into relevant folders and chose to use file conventions for each event. And then Valerie Love, our senior digital archivist, tried to load them into our repository using Indigo, which is a desktop ingest tool that we created. But Indigo just couldn't cope with the number of images. I think it also had trouble ingesting the Twitter JSON file as well. So Sean Mosley, our former digital preservation technical specialist, tried to ingest them into Rosetta, or our digital repository, using the Rosetta SIP factory. That's a METS creation tool that we created, but he ran into problems with the sheer number of images as well. Then Sean realized that the Rosetta material flow was set up to automatically generate low-resolution image files from the original images. But because the originals were low-res anyway, we didn't actually need those additional copies. So he reconfigured the material flow to omit that part. So that part was fixed, but then he ran into another problem, which required a bug fix in Rosetta. I'm not quite sure what the bug was, but it did take a little while to get fixed, but that got fixed in the end as well. So then everything was put on hold when Sean moved to a new role within our organization, and then Jeremy Kemp arrived to replace Sean. And so this time, with a bit of METS data wrangling, Jeremy successfully ingested the Kaikoura earthquake data set. So yes, finally. And so you can see in this slide the final preparation of the SIPs for ingest into Rosetta. Some files are open access, while others are restricted to the library's reading room. So we had discussions about whether we could have IEs with different access rights within one SIP. I think the answer was yes, but we decided to create separate SIPs anyway to make it easier for ingest and processing. We also had some discussion about access copies and what this actually meant, depending on your point of view or what part of the library that you're working in. Our web and digital archivist team saw access copies as more like a finding aid, something that enables the researcher to view the data set in different ways. The PRC or preservation team saw it as a copy that is generated when preserving an item. So for example, if we ingest a WAV file, it's quite large. And so the system generates an access copy that delivers more easily, such as an MP4. And that was that kind of issue that we had with the images when it was duplicating access copies. And this discussion sort of came about because it was taking a while to get the files loaded. And I thought, well, maybe we could just ingest the tweet IDs for now so that researchers could access the data set. But I was told that you couldn't ingest an access copy without a preservation master. So once we discussed how to shape the ingest of the Twitter dataset, we realized that the tweet IDs were actually going to be treated as part of the preservation master. So we probably could have done that process anyway. And then this particular tweet ID file wasn't very large, so we could just ingest it as it was. But we do know that since then, we've done a lot more Twitter harvesting. And some of those tweet IDs files will be very large, so we'll probably have to zip some of those and create the zip file as an access copy for people. Then once we did all of that, we needed to determine how the files were going to be arranged and described. So even though the tweets are published, we decided to ingest them into Tiaki, which is our archive content management system, because we're effectively creating the data set, and our archival system works better for describing this kind of content than our published catalogue does. So the arrangement and description team, with Val's input, ended up creating 5 descriptive records. And this one is the parent record, which provides a description of the event and information about the data set and the search terms used. So quite a bit of this information was taken from the README file. And then we created 4 child records to describe each of these files. The records are linked to the collection level record that was on the previous slide. And you can see here the different access restrictions for each file. And the images were loaded as one IE rather than multiple IEs, which makes it easier for loading. Then the hashed and unhashed tweets were also loaded as one IE, but we'll probably divide those into 2 IEs in future. It just makes it easy for a researcher to view the content if we do that. And so moving forward, we have run other Twitter harvests since the Kaikoura earthquake. Some are small enough to ingest via our Indigo ingest tool, but others are much larger. And we're now currently focusing on using Brandwatch rather than Twark to collect Twitter data sets. That's likely to be the topic of a future presentation, I would expect. But Brandwatch gives us the scope of collecting other social media data sets as well, like Facebook. And in addition to that, we are now picking up media files and not just image files. And we're also crawling the HTML pages referenced in the tweets using the web crawler Heritrix 3. And then Svetlana and a digital collecting specialist and Jeremy are adapting the SIP factory script that generates the METS file. So that works not only for ALMA, which is our online catalogue that SIP's linked to usually, but also for Tiaki, the archival catalogue that the Twitter data sets will be linked to. And more recently, which is very encouraging for us, we have some developers who are working on improving and automating some of the post-processing of our Twitter harvests. So for example, sometimes the URLs need unshortening, capturing the media files, collecting the HTML files, just ways of automating that more. So, because that part of the work is really time consuming. And so any way we can automate that process will be really good. The other thing we'll look at is divvying up some of the larger files into smaller entities so that they can be ingested easier. And that should make it also easier for researchers to access the data. As I said, some of our more recent Twitter captures are very large. And one final thing, access to the files in the reading room is problematic if researchers do need to access the original data set. So obviously with Twitter, we're expecting them to use the tweet IDs, which is fine. But if they need to come in and say, look at the image files, that's okay. But there are some, part of the problem is because the reading room is closed to internet access, a lot of the Microsoft products are online now. And so it's very difficult for us to provide that kind of access on the general OPACs. So we're having to use like a standalone laptop to load content onto, and then have the appropriate software loaded into that for people to interact with some of that material. But like I said, at the moment, the tweet IDs should be fine for people. So that reading room kind of, the issues that we have there are things that we have time to work on. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gillian. Massive round of applause. You're right.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing. Sorry.
Nice work. Applause, applause. That was a fantastic detailed overview. Thank you. Into the complexities involved there. I was struck by that, the tech skills that are needed, the need for that human team to come up with those creative solutions. Looking at your moving forward slide, I would just put my bias forward, and chat, feel free to disagree with me. I would love a follow-up session on that automation and that access kind of angles, like amazing to think about those, how they evolve. So thank you, chat, for answering questions and keeping that rolling along. What we'll do, I think, is hand straight over to Sean. If you have any questions that pop up from Gillian's talk, throw them in the chat. But Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Howdy all. I'm Sean Volk, Online Resources Specialist Librarian, State Library, New South Wales. I am speaking from the land of the Wangal clan of the Aora, and pay my respects to elders past, present and developing. Apologies, I have a slight speech impediment, so I may have got the name of the clan slightly mispronounced. I have no presentation. I am going to be speaking ad lib, and hopefully I'm going to cover everything I need to cover. And Jay is going to wave madly at me if I fail to do so, or I speak too long. Anyway, State Library has been collecting social media since about August 2012. It was a pilot project that was initially developed by Mylea Joseph and Catherine Barwick, and it's been running ever since. So it's about 9 years now. It's now business as usual. They ran it for several years, and then it went to my colleague Lyndon Soames, I think, and then it got passed to me, for better or worse. I can't decide which yet, but we shall see. I'm just going to grab a bunch of the links and post into the chat as soon as I find my links. So I've had a couple of things die on my laptop, but I think we're going to be good. Okay, video is off. I've put a few links in the chat of what I'm referring to. The first one is the Valor paper from 2014 by Mylea Joseph and Catherine Barwick on the entire project. So that's worth a read. So back in 2012, they partnered with the CSIRO, who had developed the Vizie platform or software interface. It's basically a web interface that does a whole bunch of things underneath. Okay. And it's mostly used by government departments as part of media management. I think we're the only entity that's using it for more ongoing collection of material. So one of the reasons we wanted to collect social media was because we were concerned about capturing the voice of engagement of New South Wales. This is about collecting the everyday public engagement. We also, we've collected physical letters, voices of politicians, public figures, and so forth. But collecting Vizie and collecting social media gives us the opportunity to collect the everyday, what conversations are going on in the day-to-day on an ongoing basis. what are people talking about now? So we've been, in 2012, we've now collected around 184 million posts, and that's increasing each year. So we did about 40 million in the last financial year. Politics remains the most popular, and the Oz poll tag currently accounts for about 34% of our month-to-month collecting. Goes up a bit higher in times of elections, and so forth. We're currently collecting actively on 2,741 tags. That's as of yesterday. We have about 3,800 in the system, but there's about 1,000 that are inactive. So parts of the challenge of managing that is making sure we activate and deactivate tags that's become less relevant. So, for example, we've been collecting the annual budget statements in New South Wales government every year, and budget papers for 2015 aren't really as relevant in 2021. So, if it's a tag, you'd probably switch off. The interface has developed over the years, as well as our ability to pull out reports from it. The data itself, I should add, is stored on state libraries' Amazon Web Service, and the interface remains the ownership of CSIRO, which we then use to access that content. We're currently collecting from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and have recently added Reddit. Reddit's been getting underway the last few months. That was a new project this year. We also try and do multilingual collecting, including Chinese, Spanish, and Arabic. And that was developed last year. That was initially in a pilot a couple of years ago, and then it was made part of business as usual last year. So Vizie is a sort of ongoing thing that we continue to partner with the CSIRO as they continue to develop it. I think we'll be meeting in a month or so to discuss the next round of projects. I suppose one of the key things is we've got a lot of stuff. 184 million posts is a lot in 9 years, but we're not trying to get everything. We're not trying to be exhaustive. For those of you from Australia, there's a new hashtag pretty much every other day about the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, some positive, some negative. We've got a few of those, but we're not trying to get every single one. It's similar to the State Premier, because ultimately we're about trying to document life in New South Wales, but we do pay attention to what's happening in the border country. We're the main Australian library who is collecting social media on an ongoing basis. So we sort of feel we have a responsibility to try and get as much national stuff as we can as well, although New South Wales is the focus. Can be a bit tricky. The way Vizie works is it pulls out data, in the case of Twitter, via the API, and then works out what fits what we want. So, for example, if we were to add Black Lives Matter as a tag by itself, we would break Vizie because we get too much data down. Whereas we would be adding tags like Black Lives Matter AUS, for example. Question about what format the Reddit data is collected in, I don't know. I couldn't tell you offhand. I'll get back to you on that one. I shouldn't have paused big conversation. Okay. Collecting via Vizie is not retrospective, it's only ongoing. So when we add a hashtag, we start collecting from that point. Occasionally, we'll use other tools to do a retrospective capture. Example I often like to talk about is Egg Boy. A couple of years back, a young lad decided to egg one of the more conservative MPs. It happened after I went home on Friday. Blew up over the weekend, and I came in Monday morning and thought, oh, I really should have captured that. And so Julian referred to Twark. We also use Twark from Documenting the Now for retrospective capture. So I ran that on the Monday morning. I got 150,000 tweets from that weekend. So I thought, okay, well, that's nice and handy. So we have those sorts of options. How am I doing for time? Good. Okay.
Yep, you're okay, Sean. You got about, 5 to 7 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just keep making stuff up then. Where am I up to? Okay. We added one of my colleagues, Jeff Barker, added a substantial section started last year on COVID-19. So we are doing quite a bit of COVID collecting. What technology are you using to collect Facebook posts? Again, we're doing Facebook via Vizie. We're using the same platform to get each of these different social media platforms, and it's all stored in Amazon Web Servers. One of the challenges of collecting is getting regional material. Politics is really easy and it dominates. Sport also dominates. I don't know why we've got so much sport in there. I have because I'm very non-sports myself. And I suppose I came out wrong. What I mean by that is we're trying to capture a diverse range of material. So to do that, I created we established the collecting social media working group a couple of years back to sort of increase diversity of what we were collecting, to make sure me, as a middle-aged white guy who hates sport, isn't dominating what is collected. And make sure we are collecting from a broad range of material. So whether it's sport or politics, regional events, festivals, and so forth. Unfortunately, the challenge of the last couple of years, there hasn't been a lot of regional events, a lot of what happening. So we are trying to catch that ongoing sense of COVID. Keep losing my notes now. Where am I up to? We're also looking at options for access. We've experimented a little with our data sets. I posted a link there to the emotion clock, which is based on, it's an ongoing sense anonymized data, whereby for a given post, it algorithmically tries to work out, assign it one of six emotions, and then does a nice pretty clock around that data. I was contacted by a researcher a couple of years back, and I was actually able to provide that data as a data set. It is literally a day-by-day tally for each emotion of how many posts match that emotion. They're also looking at other things like Twitter, collections of Twitter IDs, and whether or not we can actually make those available as downloadable data sets. We have a PhD researcher working with us at the moment, Kieran Hegarty, who was supposed to be with us in person, but unfortunately we were knocked down, so he's had to do all this remotely. But he's going to be looking at some of the terms and conditions for us, as well as and continuing to have meetings with us about what we do. I'm sorry, I'm sounding a bit garbled. I've lost my notes again. So one of our concerns is Twitter IDs. We know we can do downloadable data sets. We still need to explore what our rights are around data sets on Facebook and Instagram and other sorts of platforms. We are looking at a dedicated machine or dedicated access rather within the reading rooms, and what that might look like. We have we've established a researcher mode in Vizie itself, so potentially a researcher could come into the library and explore the content in Vizie. Excellent. Kieran's in the chat as well, so that's fab. Okay, as of April this year, we went live on API. This is still in development. Version 1 went live. It was in beta late last year, and the next speaker, Gene, will be talking. I believe he'll be talking about that bit of that. We actually gave him beta access, and he gave us really good feedback. We discovered, thanks to him, we discovered a very early bug that if you queried the API with a an empty query, it would return back the actual content. At the moment, we're not distributing the actual content itself, so we fixed that one quick smart. And just prior to this this week, Gene contacted me again, mentioned a couple of things he'd found and issues he had with Vizie, and we're going to include those in the next development cycle. I've also put in the chat there, so a link to the API and a link to a API news, a project called Which Way the Wind Blows. This was developed by an external digital follower in conjunction with DX Labs as a way of visualizing some of the data we're collecting in Vizie. And they came up with a nice sort of weather map approach as something you can do with the API. Now, I should say about the API, it is only covering the metadata of the content. It won't cover the actual posts. Okay. I think I've covered everything I wanted to say. Is there any questions on that?
Nice work, Sean. Appreciate especially that question answering on the fly there. I was almost like a Q&A clinic. Fantastic work.
That was a bit insane, actually, and I lost my train of thought every time I did it.
Nope, it was fantastic. Giving us so much detail, like the partnerships angle with CSIRO, having Reddit part of the project as well, as the chat has pointed out. You know, it's great that Reddit's part of the project. It's often overlooked as a social media platform, yet it's a vibrant internet community. So what we might do, I think, is hold the questions till the end. I would love to invite Jean Melzak to take the floor at this point. Thank you, Sean. Applause, applause. And we'll get Jean. Hey, Jean, I can see you there.
Hi.
Good to go?
Yep. Yeah, hopefully that I should follow on quite nicely from Sean. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on Bunurong land right now, and I'm going to be talking about a research collaboration that took place on both Bunurong and Wurundjeri land, among others. And I will get my presentation up. So just to give you some background on the collaboration that I was involved in, it was called #Data Creativities. And so my role is I'm a data curator. I work at the University of Melbourne, and my role is I assist researchers to collect and store and manage and curate their research data so that it can be preserved, hopefully, for the long term. And I was embedded with a particular research collaboration, and part of my role with that collaboration was to assist them in getting access to research data and curating the data throughout the duration of the project, so that the data that they generated and used was managed in a way that meant that it could be stored and preserved, hopefully so that it can be used and reused over the long term as valuable data sets. And the nature of the project itself, the kind of research topic that it was looking at, it was a group of arts and education researchers that came together to think about questions relating to teaching and the creative arts in under pandemic conditions. So it came together around sort of early May of 2020, and the research questions were looking at how the creative industries and teaching and learning in the creative industries were having to adapt to sudden changes precipitated by COVID-19, and what data could be acquired and used to learn about these changes, and how educators in those industries could shift the way that they were teaching using the knowledge derived from this data. So it was kind of a data-led collaboration. And as part of this, we looked at data from the State Libraries of New South Wales's social media archive, because one of the things that the practitioners and researchers that I was working with were interested in was looking at how educators were using social media as a way of integrating that into their teaching practice, connecting with students. And so we started looking at the ways that social media was being used both by educators, but also by the creative industries themselves as well. So this is a screenshot from the Social Media Archives Explorer. So I'm just showing it to you to give you an idea of some of the different features of it. So there's different sections such as the activities, the emotions, hashtags and keywords, and it gets quite detailed. There's also a kind of it shows you data according to a 7-day span, and you can adjust the date to show different time frames. And when you're looking at it, you can also click on each of the different activities or each of the different emotions or hashtags or keywords and so on, and really drill down and explore all of the different facets in a lot of different detail. So it's really quite an interesting way of exploring, and this is just one aspect of it. There's also the Explorer's more extensive. There's also other facets to it as well, and a map and so on. But this was just the area that we were most interested in answering our research questions. The emotions in particular was something, and we were exclusively interested in the arts category because the research questions that we were interested in were associated with the creative arts specifically. And I guess I should say as well, the reason why I'm talking to you now is because we think that it's useful for collecting institutions to have an understanding of how researchers are thinking and how they're wanting to use collections. So having an understanding of how a research group specifically used a collection like this social media collection to answer some research questions hopefully will be of value to other collecting institutions when you're thinking about how you go about curating your own collections. So it was great to have this Explorer interface, and we initially used the Explorer interface to get a sense of what data was available and what kinds of questions it could answer for us in a research sense. But it was a little bit limited. For example, you could only view the data in this 7 days at a time. So I contacted Sean and asked whether we could get, I actually initially asked if we could get emotions data associated with the arts activity for a much wider date range, from like the start of the COVID-19 lockdown through to, I think it was the end of September at that time. And also inquired about the API access to see if I could send my own queries and access my own data. And when I got access to the API, it's it was very well documented. So the documents that are publicly available, you can read the documents, had a number of different endpoints. So what you could see through the Explorer, those different sections, the activities and the emotions and the hashtags and the keywords and so on, they each have their own different endpoint in an API. So an endpoint in an API is essentially like a different URL. So where on a website, you would go to a different URL, a different page on a website. In an API, you have a different endpoint. Essentially, to get data on an activity, you would need to send a query to the activities endpoint. And to get data on the emotions, you would need to send a query to the emotions endpoint. And each of those was documented on the documentation page very clearly and in a way that could be interacted with. So once you had an API key, you could enter your API key in a field on the web page, and then actually try out the queries live on the web page. So you can see here, this is the documentation for the activities endpoint, and it's got a little try it out button. So if you'd entered your API key, you can actually enter some of the parameters for that and try it out, and it gives you samples of what you get back from it, which was very useful to have all of that information. And it was very easy to understand and to use in that sense. What I found frustrating about it was that it still imposed that 7-day limit. So as you can see in the parameters, you need to put in a date as one of the parameters, and you still only get a 7-day result back. So I was hoping I could get a much wider date range just with one query, but that's not the case. It also meant that I was hoping to be able to combine the activities and the emotions, but so to get the emotions for the arts activity, say, but because they're two different endpoints, there was the activities endpoint and the emotions endpoint, I wasn't able to do that. So for the emotions endpoints, there's a query queue, that a string that you search by when you send your query to the emotions endpoint, but you can't query by an activity. You can only send a string. So like essentially doing a keyword type search. So you can't combine the two together. So that was quite frustrating, because one of the things that we were actually interested in, and that in our research questions, we actually conceived of GLAM, the galleries, libraries, archives and museum sector, as a cultural and creative, part of the cultural and creative community sector industries that we were interested in. And so all of the curation work that had been done to curate these activities, we wanted to take advantage of that. So we wanted to find the arts data that had already been curated, but instead, in order to access the information from the API, we had to put in our own queries, our own keywords, essentially. And that meant that we didn't get the same benefits of this curation that the State Library had already done. So our research group set up a list of terms to use for our querying. And because we weren't able to query by the the activity, the arts activity. So these were the terms that the rest of the group suggested. And as you can see, that they included terms like performing and performance, which, as Sean mentioned, there does seem to be a skew within the data set for sports related data. And so even though we were thinking arts related, we ended up getting a lot of results back that suggested that they were actually sports related. So there were results that had keywords that were all about different sports teams and yeah, names of different football teams from New South Wales. So in trying to come up with a list of terms that to do our own sort of curation to find the arts data that we were interested in, we weren't very successful, and we think that the arts activity curation that the library did was probably a lot more successful in finding the data set that we were interested in. And that restricting the queries, the fact that we ended up having to send our own series of queries and couldn't query by a particular activity, and also the fact that I had to send a series of queries I couldn't just send one query to get like several months data, but I had to send a query for every week, meant that I had to rate limit my queries. So the user guidance says that you are allowed to make 100 requests of the API in a 15-minute time span. When I tried that in my script, I got a response back saying that I'd been rate limited. And so I kind of knocked that back and tried 90 requests, 80 requests, 75 requests. I ended up knocking it right back to 50 API calls every 15 minutes. And for the number of requests I needed to send, this meant that my script ended up taking about 9 or 10 hours, maybe longer, to run. So I left it running overnight. The first time I ran it, I woke up the next morning and hit the wrong key by mistake and accidentally aborted my script. So I had to run it again the next night. Eventually managed to get my data, but yeah. What we ended up doing, the collaboration that we were a part of, because of the problems that we ended up having getting the data we were interested in from the API, the collaboration that we were a part of was interested in close readings as much as big data. So when I'd initially kind of done my exploration through the Archive Explorer, when I was exploring like the early months of the initial lockdown, I'd come across this in the arts category, I'd come across this hashtag #OzLibChat, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a hashtag that's associated with a group that's for new graduates and students of the Australian Library Association. And because it's a student group or new graduate group, that fit with what we were looking at. So it's students in education coming together to talk about the issues that are on their mind on social media. And this one was obviously talking about something to do with, if you can tell from the keywords, something to do with like queer perspectives in the glam sector. And it's also got the sentiment analysis as well. So I thought, okay, well, maybe we're not really getting the data that we need from the API, but maybe if I go back and trace through the first couple of months of the COVID lockdowns, I'll find some interesting close readings of that hashtag. So I did end up doing that, and actually the next month, and I'll take you into the live Explorer to show you. So this is from the following month, and there's 3 Auslib chats that show up in the hashtags, and you can tell from the keywords that the theme must have been something to do with COVID-19, because you've got things like housebound and online and Zoom, got cats showing up, maybe cats are Zoom bombing, but you've got a real range of emotions as well. So that's obviously something that would be useful for educators to know. So it was this close reading that we ended up using in our research outputs of this particular hashtag. So this Explorer itself, we found most useful, more useful, in fact, than the API access in the end. Just for this particular audience, I'd just like to note that there was also AusPreserves shows up, and we were obviously excited about collecting and feeling a sense of joy that month. So yeah, and I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jean. And lovely note to end on, that AusPreserves hashtags being collected as well. That was fascinating. Round of applause for Jean as well, everybody. We have had, for anyone watching this video in the future, we've had a lot of the questions already answered in the chat because our presenters are so on the ball. So we will be able to summarize those as part of a blog post for the AusPreserves community that goes up on the website. I think we may take 5 minutes here because we've got till another half hour for our discussion and informal chat session. Goodbye to everyone who has to leave us at this point. But I guess I would just throw one question, I think, to our presenters at this point, unless anyone has a burning question that has not been answered, throw it in the chat. But I would just like to kick off with a biggest challenge question. I mean, you all mentioned a whole bunch of challenges through your work, but is there one particular challenge you came across that, you know, you'd say to somebody starting out in your kind of work, do this differently, or this is what I would have done if I could do it over? I'd kind of throw that to all of you, put you on the spot.
Sean here. I'd be very careful in tag selection. In my early days, I crashed Vizie a few times.
I think for me, it was we were just, you know, doing the Twitter searches and using Twike. It was, the whole tag thing was very difficult as well. I think people have mentioned that, trying to get the scope narrow enough for what you're collecting. We were doing, you have that we had a 7-day window when we were using Twike, and so you're sort of rushing around trying to find out what the tags are that you needed to use for a particular event. And then also for us, it was like, how do we narrow that down to the New Zealand kind of area? And so you knew that by trying to narrow the scope, you're actually missing content that could otherwise have been picked up. But I don't know how you sort of, what we've got now is we're moving to a more commercial system at the moment, and that's giving us a lot more options in terms of having the time. Instead of having that 7-day window, it's actually having the time to think about what kind of tags we want to use and the kind of searches that we want to do. I think that's been a real positive thing for us in our new system.
Yeah, tag selection is the really hard one, and it's hard. Jean was talking a lot about the sports stuff overwhelming the art stuff, for example. It's politics and sport dominate so many conversations, and it's very hard. And when I run monthly stats and that sort of thing, it's really hard to get down underneath all of that to look for some of the more not interesting, anti-sports that I am, some of the different stuff that people are talking about of a smaller quantity by the overwhelming other material.
Yeah, we also found overlapping of tags, like when we were collecting general election content during COVID. You know, you had two different kind of events going on at the same time, and you couldn't really there's some things you could separate out, but other things all just sort of came together.
One of the advantages of that, though, is because we have 2,700 tags. Ozpol is used a lot. So every time something comes up, people tend to use one of those tags. So even if we're not correcting a particular subject, we are getting some stuff because it's mentioned under one of the popular tags. So that's been useful.
Jean, would you add anything? I mean, you already really touched on quite a few challenges and how you went through.
I guess just I would have been more systematic about documenting everything that I was doing as I was doing it, because there were definitely early times when I was exploring things through the Explorer interface, and I couldn't remember exactly which date I'd been looking at or which hashtags I'd been exploring, and if I'd been documenting that in more detail, then that would have been, yeah, just being more rigorous about documenting what I was doing as I was doing it. And I think having more documentation available would have been useful as well. One of the things that we were actively interested in was knowing how the library had curated the content into the different activities, for example, and knowing what the criteria were for that curation. So yeah, just more documentation for everything.
Brilliant. I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on. More documentation for everything. Thank you, everybody. Another massive round of applause. I'm going to wrap up our official proceedings here today. In the chat, you will have seen I've noted that the final, organized meetup like this will be in November this year. Get in touch with us if you want to share your work with the community. It can be as informal as you like, or as formal. It's up to you. I will also note that November, the 4th of November, I'm going to put this in the chat too. The 4th of November is World Digital Preservation Day, everybody. The theme this year is breaking down barriers. This is a day where the global digital preservation community comes together to celebrate the really positive impact that digital preservation has had, especially in another year where digital information, digital infrastructure has been so instrumental in supporting all parts of society. So this day is one where you can plan events, you can plan activities, internal, external. I would encourage you to be active on the AusPreserves forum if you have, a call out for collaborative activities, if you want to share what you're doing. In the past, we've had some bake-off competitions in this region, which has gathered international interest for the baked goods that some in our community have been cooking up that have a digital theme. So, get active in the community and share what you're doing, or share ideas or call-outs. Okay, that's it for me for the official wrap-up. What we're going to do is we're going to stick around for another 20 minutes or so. Thank you, everybody, for coming along today. If you want to stick around and just have some informal chat, meet some people in the community, stay on. Otherwise, goodbye and thank you. We'll see you in November for the next official organized meetup.